Part 1. The restaurant was already full before the sun had even gone down. It was the kind of place where people spoke softly, where plates were set down gently, and where every detail from the folded napkins to the soft lights was meant to make the guests feel important. In the middle of all this, a young woman named Lena moved from table to table with steady hands and a careful smile. Lena had been working at the restaurant for almost a year. She was not the kind who liked to be noticed. She preferred to stay behind the noise, doing her work quietly so the night could pass without trouble. She took orders, carried trays, and helped the chefs when needed. Most of the customers never learned her name. That was fine with her. She came to work to earn a living, nothing more. But on that evening, something felt different. Even before the trouble started, the air was already tense. The manager kept checking the door and fixing his tie. The chefs whispered to each other. Even the other waiters were moving more quickly than usual. Lena didn't understand why until she saw a group of men walk into the restaurant. Leading them was a man everyone in the city seemed to know, even if they had never met him. His name was Mr. Colin, a wealthy businessman known for buying big companies, selling them for more money, and never looking back. He walked into the restaurant like he owned it. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He simply nodded once, and the manager rushed toward him almost immediately. "Good evening, sir," the manager said, bowing slightly. "Your table is ready." The other men in the group followed behind Mr. Colin, laughing and talking loudly. They wore expensive suits and gold watches that caught the light whenever they moved their hands. People turned to look at them, some out of admiration, others out of curiosity. Lena tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice them. Their table was in her section. That meant she would be the one taking their orders and serving them all night. Her stomach tightened. She had dealt with difficult guests before, people who complained about everything, people who spoke rudely, people who treated waiters like furniture. But something about Mr. Colin made her uneasy. His eyes were sharp, and his voice carried a tone that suggested he was used to telling people what to do. Still, she took a deep breath, fixed her apron, and walked toward the table. The men were already arguing about something when she arrived. Not angry arguing, more like a group of people trying to prove who was the smartest. They barely noticed her until she spoke. "Good evening. May I take your drink orders?" she asked. One of the men smirked. "Finally, service." Another waved his hand at her as if she were someone he had known for years, though clearly he had not. "Bring us the most expensive wine on the menu," he said without looking at her. She opened her mouth to ask which one, but Mr. Colin lifted a hand, signaling her to stop. "That will be fine," he said. His voice was deep and calm, the kind of voice people obeyed without thinking. Lena nodded and left the table, hiding her worry. Expensive wine meant expensive expectations, and expensive expectations usually came with trouble. The night went on like that for a while. The group drank, laughed, and discussed business deals that sounded more like battles. Lena kept serving them carefully, always stepping away quickly when she felt the tension shift. But it wasn't until later, after the wine, after the food, after the loud stories, that the real moment happened. One of the men pointed toward the far corner of the restaurant. A grand piano stood there, untouched. It had been there for years, but hardly anyone used it anymore. Most guests preferred soft background music rather than live performances. "What's that even doing here?" the man asked. "Is it just decoration?" The others laughed, except for Mr. Colin, who squinted at the piano like it annoyed him. "Does anyone here actually play it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. The manager, who had been standing nearby, stepped in quickly. "We sometimes have musicians perform on weekends, sir. Tonight it is only for display." "Display?" one of the men said with a laugh. "A grand piano? That is a waste," another added. "Ask one of the staff. Someone must know how to play a simple tune." The manager's eyes darted around, and unfortunately, they landed on Lena. She froze. She had not touched a piano in years, not since her life had taken a turn that pushed music far out of her reach. "She used to play," the manager said before thinking. His voice was nervous, as if he was trying to fix a problem before it started. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Why would he say that? Mr. Colin turned toward her slowly. He said, "You can play." Lena felt the attention of the entire table shift onto her. She forced a small smile, hoping it would make the moment pass. "It's been a long time," she said softly. "I don't play anymore." The man sitting closest to her chuckled. "Come on, it can't be that hard. Play something, anything." She shook her head. "I'm just here to work tonight." Mr. Colin leaned back in his chair, studying her. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't angry either. His expression was unreadable. "So you can play," he said. "But you won't?" Lena looked at the manager, hoping he would step in and take the pressure away. But instead, he whispered, "It might be better if you just play something." Only for a minute, her heart sank. The last thing she wanted was to perform in front of strangers, especially strangers like these. And being forced into it made it feel even worse. But the eyes watching her gave her no space to refuse. If she said no, the men might complain. The manager might get in trouble, and she might lose her job. Something she could not afford. For a moment, she closed her eyes, just to breathe. "All right," she finally said, her voice almost too quiet to hear. The men cheered lightly, amused. They didn't expect anything serious. They expected something simple, maybe even something they could laugh about later. Mr. Collin didn't cheer. He simply nodded once, as if giving permission. Lena felt her knees weaken. The piano felt miles away even though it was only a few steps from the table. The entire room had turned slightly quieter, curious about what was happening. Each step she took toward the piano felt heavy. She could feel the eyes on her back, feel the pressure, feel the echo of the past she had tried to leave behind. She sat down slowly, her hands resting in her lap. She had not imagined sitting at a piano again, not like this, not in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Her fingers trembled, her heart beat too fast. She stared at the keys, untouched and shining under the soft lights. Behind her, the men waited. She took a long breath, trying to push the fear away. For a moment, she wondered if she should just play something quick and simple, something to get the moment over with. But deep inside, she felt the old part of herself, small but still alive, stirring. She lifted her hands toward the keys, and the entire room leaned in, unaware that the night was about to change in a way none of them expected. Part to the moment Lena touched the piano bench, she felt as if the whole restaurant had fallen away. She could still hear whispers and soft clinks of silverware, but they felt distant, like sounds coming through a thick wall. All she could focus on were the keys in front of her, the same black and white keys she once loved more than anything else. Her hands rested in her lap for a few seconds longer. She wasn't sure if they were trembling from fear, nerves, or the weight of memories she had kept locked away. She slowly lifted them, letting her fingertips hover over the keys without pressing down. Behind her, the men were getting restless. One of them let out a small laugh, as if expecting a joke. Another cleared his throat loudly. The atmosphere felt heavy, but also uncertain. Mr. Collin said nothing. He sat still, calm, almost too calm, like a man waiting to see if something interesting would happen. Lena could feel the pressure building. This wasn't how she had imagined ever returning to music. Not under the lights of a fancy restaurant. Not with everyone staring at her. Not because someone wealthy decided to challenge her. She took a slow breath, just enough to steady her fingers. Her first touch on the keys was light. She played a soft note, barely enough for anyone in the back of the room to hear. But it was enough to remind her of something she had forgotten she still had. The memory of sitting in a small room with an old piano. The way her teacher used to nod gently when she played well. The sound of her younger self practicing for hours, dreaming of a world she never got to enter. That old desire, that small spark, flickered inside her. She pressed another note, then another, slowly at first, like walking into cold water step by step. And then she began to play. The song she chose wasn't planned. It came from somewhere deep inside her, a tune she had written years ago when life had felt heavy and uncertain. A tune she had never played for anyone. The first few seconds felt fragile. The notes were quiet, almost shy. But then something shifted. The piano's voice grew fuller, warmer, richer, as if responding to her touch after years of silence. A few people in the restaurant turned their heads, curious. The clinking of glasses slowed. The conversation softened, but Lena didn't notice them. She was no longer in the restaurant. She was no longer a waitress with tired feet and bills waiting at home. She was just a person sitting at a piano, letting her heart speak. The melody wrapped around her like a memory she had been afraid to revisit. Each note carried a piece of her past struggles, her lost dreams, her quiet hopes. The sadness in the tune wasn't heavy. It was beautiful in a quiet way, like a soft rain after a long day. Her fingers moved with ease, as if they remembered everything her mind had forgotten. The world she had run from slowly opened up inside her again. Behind her, the men who had been laughing earlier fell silent. One lifted his glass halfway to his lips and forgot to drink. Another stopped mid-sentence. Even the chefs behind the counter paused to listen. The restaurant felt like it was holding its breath, Lena still didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the keys, but they weren't really seeing the piano. They were seeing the life she had left behind, the competitions she never got to attend, the scholarship she once earned but couldn't keep, the piano that had once meant everything to her. As she continued to play, her heartbeat settled, her breathing softened. She no longer felt the pressure from the table of wealthy men. She no longer felt the expectations. She felt free in a way she hadn't felt in years. The song grew deeper, richer. Her fingers moved faster, weaving emotion through the melody. The rise and fall of the notes felt like waves, each one carrying a story, a memory, a piece of her soul. People from nearby tables leaned slightly forward, drawn in by the unexpected performance. A couple held hands under their table, touched by the warmth of the music. A group of teenagers near the back lowered their phones, eyes widening. Even the waiters paused for a moment, their steps slowing as they listened. Lena didn't try to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was just expressing a part of herself she had forgotten she still owned. When the melody reached its most emotional point, even the air felt still. The men who usually spoke loudly and confidently now sat perfectly quiet. Their faces softened, almost confused by how deeply the song was affecting them. She played with so much honesty that it felt like the music traveled across the room and touched every person listening. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, pure, and full of truth. By the time she reached the last part of the piece, her hands no longer trembled. Instead, they moved with calm certainty. The song settled into a gentle ending, like the soft closing of a book. The final note hung in the air, warm and clear. For a split second after the sound faded, the restaurant was absolutely silent. No one clapped. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the world had stopped to breathe with her. Then, slowly, the sound returned, not of plates or laughter, but of people exhaling. A soft murmur spread through the room, the kind that follows something unforgettable. Lena let her hands fall into her lap again. Her heartbeat was steady now, calmer than when she had first sat down. She felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness, but also something new, something close to pride. She finally looked back toward the table. The men stared at her, not with amusement or mockery, but with shock. Real, genuine shock. One of them blinked several times, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Another looked down at the table, unable to make eye contact. Their confident, loud energy had faded. Mr. Collin was the only one whose expression she couldn't read. He sat straight, elbows resting lightly on the arms of his chair, eyes fixed on her. But there was no smirk, no arrogance, only curiosity and something that looked almost like respect. Lena wasn't sure what to do next. Should she get up? Should she say something? Should she just walk away? Before she could decide, her manager rushed forward, whispering, "That was unbelievable." His eyes were wide, as if he had just witnessed something rare. She nodded slightly, unsure what to say. As she stood from the bench, she felt her legs wobble. Playing had taken more out of her than she expected. She steadied herself by touching the edge of the piano. The room finally erupted, the applause echoing through the restaurant. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was warm and grateful, rising like a wave. Lena's cheeks warmed. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to people admiring her. She bowed her head slightly, unsure how else to respond. As she walked back toward the table, the group of men remained silent. They weren't clapping. They were still processing. For the first time that night, Lena didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt like someone who had just shared a part of her life. And the world had actually listened. But the moment wasn't over. Not yet. She returned to their table slowly, waiting to see what they would say, whatever their reaction would be. She knew one thing for sure: nothing about the night was the same anymore. Part 3. When Lena made her way back to the table, she could feel dozens of eyes following her. The applause was still echoing softly through the room, fading into small murmurs of amazement. People returned to their meals, but their glances kept drifting toward her, as if they were trying to understand how a quiet waitress had just filled the room with such powerful music. She stopped a few steps away from the group of wealthy men, unsure how close she should get. Her hands were clasped together to hide the slight trembling that was returning now that the moment had passed. She could still feel the weight of the performance in her chest, like the last note of the song had stayed inside her. The men stared up at her. Not one of them wore the amused expression they had earlier. Their laughter and loud talk had disappeared entirely. It was strange to see them so quiet, almost as if they had forgotten they were supposed to be the loudest people in the room. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. "That was something else," he said. His voice didn't carry the same confidence it had earlier. It was softer, almost uncertain. Another nodded slowly, still looking at her hands as if trying to figure out how they had produced something so moving. "You didn't tell us you could play like that," he said. Lena didn't know what to reply. She had told them she didn't play anymore. She had tried to avoid the entire situation, but now she had played, and there was no way to undo what they had seen. She gave a small smile and said, "Thank you." It was all she could think of. The man closest to her shook his head, still surprised. "You weren't just good," he said. "You were. I don't even know the word for it." It felt like listening to a story without words. One of the other men leaned back in his seat. "You should be performing somewhere real," he said, "not working in a place like this." Lena glanced at the manager, who had been standing nearby. His face tightened slightly, unsure if he should step in or stay quiet. He looked proud, but also nervous, as if afraid they might take her away. But then Mr. Collins spoke. He hadn't said a word since she'd started playing. He hadn't clapped, hadn't looked away, hadn't shown any clear reaction. Now he sat forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes fixed on her with a steady gaze. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice low and calm. Lena swallowed. "I took lessons when I was younger," she said. "I used to play a lot. It was a big part of my life." "Used to?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded. "Life changed," she said simply. "I had to stop." One of the men frowned. "That's a shame. Someone with your talent shouldn't waste it." She didn't respond. She didn't want to tell them the full story. Not here, not now. They didn't need to know the years of struggle, the responsibilities she had taken on, the reasons she had traded music for survival. Colin's eyes didn't leave her. He looked thoughtful, but also puzzled, as if her story didn't fit what he had expected. "You played like someone who never stopped," he said quietly. Lena felt her cheeks warm slightly. It was strange to receive such a comment from someone like him, a man used to giving orders, not compliments. Before she could reply, one of the other men leaned forward with a grin. "Play another one," he said. "Just one more. You have to." The others nodded eagerly. The softness in their eyes returned to excitement, but this time it wasn't mocking. They truly wanted to hear her again. But Lena shook her head gently. "I'm sorry," she said. "I have work to do. I can't spend the whole evening at the piano." The men looked disappointed, but they didn't argue. Perhaps they sensed how much the first performance had taken out of her. The manager stepped in quickly. "Yes, gentlemen," he said. "Lena still has tables to serve. I'm sure you understand." They nodded reluctantly. Lena gave a small bow and turned away. As she walked back toward the counter, she felt lighter but also drained. Playing had brought back emotions she had buried. It felt good, but it also left her slightly vulnerable, like she had opened a part of her heart to people she didn't know. A few guests stopped her as she passed by. "That was beautiful. You should never stop playing. I hope I get to hear you again someday." Each compliment landed gently, surprising her. People usually passed her without noticing, but now they looked at her like she was someone different, someone worth paying attention to. She returned to the counter, where one of the waiters whispered, "I had no idea you could do that." Another added, "You were amazing." "I got chills." Lena smiled shyly. She didn't know how to handle so much attention. She just wanted things to calm down so she could return to the quiet rhythm of her shift. But of course, the night wasn't going to calm down that easily. A few minutes later, the manager hurried to her with a worried expression. "They want to speak with you again," he whispered. Her heart sank. "Now?" "Yes," he said. "I don't think they mean any harm, but you should go." With a nervous breath, she walked back to the table. This time the men weren't talking among themselves. They were waiting for her. The one who had been the loudest earlier spoke first. "We were discussing something," he said. "Your music, your future." She froze, unsure where this was going. Another man leaned in with a serious expression. "Do you want to go back to playing? Not just for fun, really playing, like concerts, training, everything?" Lina's breath caught. That dream had felt dead for so long she didn't know how to respond. I don't know," she said quietly. "It's been years, but you can still do it," the man insisted. "If you can play like that without practice, imagine what you could do with help." She shook her head gently. "It's not that simple. My life doesn't allow that right now." Before the men could argue, Mr. Collins lifted his hand, silencing them instantly. He looked at Lena with a slow, deep gaze. Life rarely gives chances twice, he said, but sometimes it sends reminders. Tonight might be one of them. His words were calm, but they hit her more strongly than anything else said that night. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what he meant, but something in his tone felt sincere. I'm not offering anything, he added, leaning back. Not yet. I'm just telling you not to give up something that clearly still belongs to you. The other men nodded, agreeing. Lena lowered her eyes. It was overwhelming. Too many emotions, too many memories, too many possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine again. She excused herself gently and returned to her duties, hoping the rush of the night would give her something else to think about. But the music she had played kept echoing in her mind, and in the minds of everyone who had heard it. Even after she served the last dish and cleared the final table, she could feel the shift in the air. People still looked at her differently, and Mr. Cullen watched her whenever she passed by, his expression thoughtful, almost concerned. As the night drew to a close, she realized something quietly. She had walked into the restaurant as just another worker, but she was leaving it as something entirely different, whether she wanted it or not. The song had changed everything. For the moment the room went silent after her first song. Everything inside the large dining hall felt different. The same people who once whispered and laughed now watched her with open curiosity, almost holding their breath. Even the Tycoon, who had forced her to play in the first place, seemed unsure of what he had just witnessed. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys and rested them on her lap. Her heart was still racing, but it was no longer from fear. It was from something new, something she had not felt in years, a kind of freedom, a rediscovery of a part of herself she had locked away. The Tycoon stepped closer, his expression impossible to read. She looked down, unsure if he was angry, impressed, or simply surprised. He had expected a clumsy performance, maybe a few weak notes, but he had not expected this. Finally, he spoke. Play another one. His voice was calm, but not cold like before. It held something different. Respect. Maybe. She swallowed hard. Part of her wanted to say no. She had already done more than she ever planned, but the eyes around her waited with quiet hope. Even the staff she worked with every day stood in the back, holding trays still, watching her like they were seeing her for the first time. She nodded softly, placed her hands back on the keys, and let her fingers settle into a position that felt familiar, almost like the piano itself was guiding her. This time, she chose a softer melody, something gentle, a tune she used to play at home when the world outside felt too loud. She let each note rise and fall like a small story on its own. The room relaxed, as if every person inside had taken a breath at the same time. Halfway through the piece, the Tycoon sat down, not on his usual seat at the head of the long table, but on a chair near the piano. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, listening with full attention. She had never seen him sit this way, not at meetings, not during fancy dinners, not even during important presentations. The music filled the hall, bouncing off the tall walls and the glass chandeliers. Some guests closed their eyes. Some looked at her like she was rewriting everything they thought they knew about her. A few even whispered softly, but it was not the judgmental whispering from earlier. It was the amazed kind. As she finished the second song, the last note lingered in the air, almost refusing to fade. When it finally dissolved into silence, no one moved for a few seconds. Then people began to clap, not slowly, but with genuine excitement. She felt her face grow warm. She had never played for so many people before. She had never thought she would. After the applause settled, the Tycoon stood again. Where did you learn to play like that? He asked, his tone softer. She hesitated. She never liked talking about herself. My mother taught me, she finally said. When I was young, we didn't have much, but we had an old piano. She paused, then added, I used to play every day. It made her smile. The guests listened quietly. The Tycoon nodded slowly as if he understood something he hadn't before. Why did you stop? He asked. She looked at her hands. Life got hard. I had to work. My mother got sick. We sold the piano. The Tycoon pressed his lips together, almost thoughtfully. There was something in his eyes now, something that hinted he felt responsible, not for her past, but for pushing her into revealing something so personal. She stepped away from the piano, picking up her apron again, ready to return to her job. But the Tycoon lifted a hand. Wait, sit, please. The word please shocked everyone, including her. He took a breath. You shouldn't be serving tables after playing like that. A murmur spread among the guests. She froze, unsure what he meant. He turned to the room. We have spent years inviting musicians from everywhere. Some were good, some were great. But what we heard just now, he glanced at her again. That was rare. She felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say. He turned back toward her. Would you play one more? Not for me. For yourself. He stepped back to give her space. She hesitated again. But something inside her whispered that she should do it. She sat down and touched the keys lightly. The piano felt like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. This time, she didn't think of the guests or the tycoon. She didn't think of her job or her fear. She didn't even think of the past. Instead, she allowed herself to play something she had created long ago, a tune she never played for anyone. Because she always felt it wasn't finished. The first few notes were unsure, but soon the melody grew stronger, rising and weaving into something beautiful. It had pieces of her childhood, pieces of her struggles, and pieces of the hope she carried quietly in her heart. And the room listened, every soul in it. The tycoon watched her with a look she had never seen on his face before. Not power, not arrogance, not pride, just admiration. When the song ended, the silence that followed was different, deeper, more emotional. A few guests wiped their eyes. Even one of the chefs near the kitchen door blinked quickly. This time, the applause was louder than before. Not wild or noisy, but full, warm, and honest. She stood and took a small step back, unsure how to react. The tycoon approached again. You are extraordinary, he said quietly. She smiled. Only a little, because she didn't know how to accept praise like that. He added, there's something I want to discuss with you after the event. Something important. The way he said it made her nervous, but not in a bad way. The guests slowly returned to their seats, but their eyes kept drifting toward her. She could hear bits of conversation. She's amazing. I had no idea. Where has she been hiding all this talent? Her co-workers came to her side. One whispered, I knew you were hiding something, but not this. Another said, you just changed everything tonight. She laughed softly, a little embarrassed, but also happy. As she walked away from the piano and returned to her duties, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter than ever. Something had shifted. Something in her life had opened. The tycoon didn't interrupt her again, but he watched her from time to time, still deep in thought. It was clear he was planning something. Later that night, when most guests had left and she was helping stack chairs, the tycoon approached her once more. I meant what I said earlier, he told her. We need to talk. His voice held seriousness, but not the harsh kind she was used to. She nodded slowly, unsure but willing to hear him out. He motioned toward a quieter part of the hall. Come, just for a moment. As she followed him, she felt a mix of fear, curiosity, and a spark of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. And deep down, she sensed that whatever he was about to say next might change everything she thought she knew about her future. And she was right. The moment the last note faded into the air, the room stayed quiet, almost as if no one dared breathe. The young woman sat still for a few seconds, unsure of what would happen next. She could feel her heart racing, and her fingers shook slightly as she lifted them from the keys. She had played that song from a place deep inside her, a place she rarely shared with anyone, and now the entire room had heard it. She didn't know if she should stand, stay seated, or simply walk away. Everything was still, like time had paused. Suddenly, the silence broke, not with a few claps, but with a full wave of applause that rolled across the room. People stood from their seats. Some clapped slowly at first, then with more confidence. Others looked at her with wide, amazed eyes, like they had witnessed something they didn't expect to see in an ordinary evening. Even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the swinging doors, wondering what had caused such a reaction in the usually calm dining area. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She had spent most of her life trying not to be noticed, and now she felt every pair of eyes on her. It made her nervous, but at the same time, something warm spread in her chest. It wasn't pride exactly, it was more like relief. For once, her music had reached people in the way she always hoped it could. She stood up slowly from the bench and gave a small smile. She didn't say anything. She didn't know what to say. Words felt too small. The applause kept going, long enough that she felt her cheeks grow warm. She kept her eyes low, though every part of her wanted to look around and see the expressions on people's faces. At the large table near the back, the one where the wealthy guests were seated, things were different. The man who had forced her to play sat frozen. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't clapping. He looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. For the first time that night, he seemed unsure of himself. He had expected a joke, not a moment that would shift the air in the room. One of the people at his table, an older gentleman with calm eyes, looked at her with a thoughtful expression. His applause was softer, but very genuine. He leaned toward the man beside him and whispered something. She couldn't hear what, but she noticed the man nodding slowly. Her manager rushed toward her, whispering quick praise. "That was incredible," he said. "I had no idea you could play like that." She didn't respond. She wasn't sure he ever cared enough to ask before. The attention felt strange, like a spotlight had been switched on suddenly. She only wanted to return to her normal shift, but somehow she knew nothing about this night felt normal anymore. As she tried to walk back toward the service area, her path was blocked by the older man from the important table. He didn't move in a pushy or rude way. He simply stepped closer with a gentle smile. "May I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. His voice was calm, respectful, nothing like the tone she had heard earlier from the arrogant man who had ordered her to play. She nodded, though she felt unsure. She didn't know who he was. He introduced himself quietly, telling her he attended many music events and sometimes supported young talent. He explained that her performance was not something he felt should end here, in this room, as just a memory. "Your playing has something rare," he said. "Not just skill, heart, real heart. You don't see that often anymore. Or hear it." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments always made her uncomfortable, and compliments of this kind felt even heavier. She lowered her eyes, feeling shy but touched. He continued, "If you're willing, I would like to help you. I know people in music schools, real places where your talent won't go unnoticed. If you want, I could arrange a meeting." Her breath caught for a moment. She had once dreamed of attending a proper music school. She had gotten close once, long ago, but life had pushed her in another direction. Money, responsibilities, reality, everything had made the dream fade. "I don't know if I can afford anything like that," she said softly. The man shook his head gently. "That part would not be your worry. If you're willing to work hard, I'm willing to support you. Think about it. No pressure tonight." She felt her eyes sting, though she tried not to show it. This was something she never expected, never even imagined. A chance like this felt like something from another world. While they were talking, the arrogant man who had forced her to play stood up from his seat. He had finally recovered from the shock of her performance. He walked toward them with a stiff expression, trying to look confident again. "That was impressive," he said, but his tone didn't sound sincere. It sounded forced, like he didn't want to admit she had surprised him. "I didn't think you had that in you. Good job." She simply nodded, not trusting herself to respond. He waited for a reaction but didn't get one. Then he stepped back, clearly irritated that he no longer controlled the moment. His guests barely paid attention to him now. They were more focused on her, the waitress who had just played like a professional. The older man gave her a small card with his contact information. "Think about it," he said again. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering opportunity. You earned this by yourself." She took the card with trembling fingers. She had never received something so important from a stranger. It felt like holding a key to a door she thought was locked forever. As she tucked the card into her apron, she took a slow breath. The room had returned to its usual activity, but the atmosphere still held a trace of what had happened. Conversations had shifted. People still looked in her direction with gentle smiles or curious expressions, but she didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. She felt hopeful. That night, when she finally walked home after finishing her shift, the streets were quiet. She replayed the music in her head, the way the room had reacted, the offer she had received. The world around her looked different, as if the city lights were a little brighter, as if the air carried something new. She held her small bag close to her chest, and the card inside felt like a warm promise, a path she didn't know she would get again. She had spent years believing her dream was behind her, but tonight showed her that maybe it wasn't gone, maybe it was only sleeping. As she walked down the empty street, she lifted her head, looked up at the night sky, and let herself smile. Not a big smile, just a quiet one filled with hope, because one song had changed everything, and maybe this time, she would follow where the music wanted to take her.